Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Good evening, my friends, my dear friends. Good evening, my subscribers who registered so lately onto my YouTube channel. My name is Hasan Zeki Alp. Sorry about my this broken voice. I have a flu for these days. That's why. Okay. Anyway, I have written an essay about an experience for that. A fantastic story, a short story. Actually, I have written it in Turkish, in my native language, and afterwards, just I wanted to share it with other friends who live in other countries who speak English in universal language, and just I want to make a paraphrase before reading out this short story to you. I have experienced some extraordinary mental state now and then, and I just try to paraphrase, try to explain it myself, but actually I do not have any idea what's going on in my brain, and after such experiences, just I wanted to record this, to make a record about that. And this short story has produced as a result of decision. And as I said before, I have written it, I have edited in Turkish, and by means of some tools and my translation capability, I have translated it into English, and somehow it can contain some grammatic errors. Sorry about that, but anyway, it is in English, and it can be understood who speaks and understands English. And beforehand, I'd like to express my apologize for my accent, broken accent. Just I do my best to overcome that, but this that way. You are a foreigner, your native language is not English, your mother language is not English, so that could be some differences, some ridiculous differences with a native speaker and a learner, English learner. Anyway, just I will tell this story by means of scrolling PDF file, and just I can control its scrolling rate by means of some keys here, and you will see my face at the right side of the screen. Just I want to share this screen. Okay, actually the name of this essay is Whose Dream Shall I Enter? Whose Dream Shall I Enter? I wrote it in 2016, 2017 in Istanbul, and I actually posted this essay some social media, but this time I'd like to express it in English, spoken in my voice. Just I can say enjoy yourself. Whose dream shall I enter? Posted by Hasan Zeki in Istanbul, 2016-2017. And the sections of my essay is just like that. Am I Dead? The first chapter. The second chapter is Getting Used to This World. And the third, The Guests. And next, Diving into the Depths of Consciousness in the Other Realm. And the other one, Universal Contact Center. And the another experience. And the last chapter, last part, Return to the Realm of the Dead. And okay, enjoy. Am I dead? After that job took place, my childhood years, my youth, all my middle-age memories, the days, hours, and minutes I spent in my old age, passed before my eyes like a film strip. Then everything suddenly turned dark. I felt like I was in a dark tunnel. I didn't know if time flies. For a moment I realized that there is a white light at the end of this dark tunnel, and there it is, as if I was floating, as if I was flying towards this very bright white light. Whether this bright white light hit my face or whether I was immersed in the rays of this bright light, I could not quite understand. Now everything had turned white. I don't understand. I don't know how to describe what I've been through. In the middle of this white sea, I felt a hand reaching out to me. It was a hand in white. It was like I knew the owner of the hand. It was a young woman. She was in her 40s. In fact, she looked a lot like my mother. Being the youngest and the last in the family, I think my mother was a little over 30 when she gave birth to me. She was in her 40s when I was 10 years old. So my mother was so young when I was just starting school. In those years, people didn't pay such much attention to such things. In those years, I know that my mother suffered from rheumatism, gallbladder disease, joint pain, and then a series of heart-related ailments. Yes, that woman must be Mom, because she looked so much like Mom. This time, she extended her other hand towards me and said, "Son, I didn't know whether to be happy or sad when they informed me that you were coming. We missed you all so much. Your father couldn't come. They will let him later," she said. That's when I realized that I had a death experience. My mother told me at once what she experienced and learned about his post-death realm. When I try to express it here, the first thing that will tie my tongue will be the concept of time. There is no such thing as time here. You wait, and wait. All you did was think and focus on something and any subject, any thought, as if you were thinking about it. According to my mother, no one told her that I was dying. She said that for a moment, I came to the fore in her mind with the thought that I'm her youngest son, her black lamb, her black lamb. And when she reached out, she took my hand. One of the things my mother told me about this realm was this: as a dead person, when you bring a person to the fore in your thoughts and start thinking about that person's face, name, title, and or connection with the thing you remember, if that person is dead, you will find yourself next to him, her, or she finds himself or herself next to you. If that person is not dead yet, that is, she is or he is alive, well, you are in that person's dream, or that person's ears are ringing. His or her eyes are twitching, or something like that is happening. If the person you are concentrating on, your thoughts or a memory about him or her, does not appear next to you, understand that you have entered his or her dream, so that person, that if he's alive, is having a dream about you. After my mother told me this way, I realized that this realm of that is not such a lonely place. At least with this concentration of thoughts and memories, names and adjectives, I would be able to contact that person in some way. But this was a strange place. No one seemed to be eating, drinking, talking, or moving. You just think and then visualize it. If that person is dead, she or he appears next to you. I asked my mother if the reverse also worked. That is, when a living person saw a dead person in a dream, was that person somehow aware of it? My mother greeted with a smile. It's that made them dream that dream, she said. Frankly, I was confused. I wouldn't do it now. I would try it later. I say now and later, but these adverbs of time mean nothing. I know. I just didn't want to think about anyone, dead or alive, right now. When I gathered my attention and looked around, I realized that there was no one with me at that moment, and that my mother had disappeared both from my thoughts and from the place where she was at that moment. Okay, that was the first chapter of my essay. And the second, getting used to this world. I tried to reconsider this experience of that. Who caused it? Why this happened to me? I'm trying to understand, to remember. I wonder if the electromagnetic effect superimposition and amplification experiment I tried while I was alive caused this. Did I miss the point? I don't know. There is no obvious person or event in my mind or in my thoughts. More precisely, I realized that I was in a situation such as not being able to distinguish conversations in a very crowded place, and looking for a similar familiar person among the crowd, that not being able to see them. Amazed, I've never felt this before. I could only see the faces and eyes of my relatives and other people I knew, that I personally witnessed. Even in the experiment of the effects of magnetic field superimposition, which I researched while I was alive, the images were so vivid, more realistic. These, on the other hand, are only about a face, like portrait pictures on passports and IDs. Later, I realized that they were like the titles on the table of contents of a book. It was as if these portraits themselves were in connection with their dead beings. All I had to do was visualize the person concerned or spell out his name in order to establish this link. That's what would revive the link. This time I thought of my father. This time, my little lad, my father had reunited with his only wife, his only Eve, Hawa. Less than 2 months after my mother fell in the bathroom in that unfortunate accident as a result of her brain hemorrhage and passed away like this, I should have contacted my father. I tried to think of my father, to picture his face. I always remembered my father's middle-aged state, his maturity period. I tried to picture his graying and falling hair, his yellow cigarette. I remember his Gelinjik brand cigarette, his gray mustache, his 40s, and tried to focus my thoughts on the youngest. I remember my father. I knew this would happen. I learned from my mother that this would be true in this realm of the dead, exactly as she said. My father appeared before my eyes, in front of my white clothes, with his arms outstretched to me. My son, my black lamb, how much I missed you, he said. And when I embraced his body, I felt his presence dissolve and disappear within me. I couldn't quite understand if it was actually my father or if I was a part of my father. I felt like my father, and I felt that he said, "Our son is among us, Eve." Perhaps it was my father speaking. As they say, between the father and the son, there was a path, a link, a bridge from heart to heart. In fact, this expression is even incomplete, because it was not just a bond or a bridge. It was something like a liquid gas plasma that flowed and poured into each other. Just pouring into each other. I felt my father in front of me, and immediately afterwards in my whole being. My father suffered from advanced Alzheimer's disease in the last years of his life. He was starting to forget almost everything and asking over and over again, or telling the same things over and over again. I was going to make an attempt to think about more than one person at the same time, and wonder if a conference could be held. However, I could not see my father and grandmother together, as there was no such thing as controlling time. I couldn't feel. I couldn't think. But meanwhile, I experienced something else extraordinary. I started thinking about my grandmother, Asiye Turhan. She is my grandmother. I had many memories in my mind about my grandmother's houses on the Lady Zübeyde Boulevard in Susurluk. Their house and garden, uncle and his family. One of the series of memories I remember is the workshop where the sons of Turhan family once worked as sawmills and carpenters, and the portal that entered the porch. In this derelict sawmill, which was a bit dim, there was sawdust here and there, and its related supplies, sawdust abound on the ground. Although not very often during our visits to our mom and grandmother, I used to walk through these portals and pass through this derelict sawmill while I was wandering around, trying to imagine how my uncles were working here in their youth. From the interior of the workshop, there was access to the garden of the house. As soon as you step into the garden, the walls and the windows of the kitchen, which was added to my grandmother's house, were coming in view. After 10 or 15 paces, on the right was the kitchen door. Even some evenings, together with my father and mother, we would bring dry tea leaves and some other stuff from the shop in the bazaar street, and brew tea with the mother, daughter, son-in-law, and grandson, and drink our tea with pleasure in the cozy kitchen. I remember that my uncle would come and join us from time to time. My journeyman uncle, my uncle Ibrahim, Aka Ibrahim, the Khalfa villager. As I concentrated my consciousness on these memories, I suddenly found myself in one of the inner rooms of my grandmother's house on the boulevard. My grandmother came out of the inset chamber. Her arms were rolled up to her elbows and wet, her feet bare. She was using that little room for ablution, for cleaning. A joy, a radiance appeared on her face when she saw us coming. Actually, there was something odd about it. I thought that when I intensified my thoughts about the house on the boulevard, my grandmother would appear right next to me. However, so many memories of that place were entrenched in my memory, and such profound events took place that this concentration of consciousness showed its effect in another way and took me to the past in time and space. I knew nowadays the house on the boulevard, the workshop, the winds were blowing into the place of my uncle's old house. More precisely, there was no space or square place left to blow the wind. The 5 or 6 floor apartments were built adjacent to each other from the corner of the former monopole administration to Fevzi Pasha Street. As the leap in this place time continued, I left the gateway of my grandmother's house facing the boulevard and crossed the road. And at that time, the brook coming from above was not covered. I saw a dwarf tree on the side of the canal. My eyes searched for Kemal, my cousin, aka Dayıoğlu Kemal. I looked around, couldn't see him. At that moment, I found myself back to the realm I came from. I was beginning to understand that strange things, extraordinary things could happen in this realm. My Father's Day, my late grandfather Hasan, whom I took one of my names, aka Hasan with the fedora hat, had died 9 years before I was born. I had the opportunity to recognize his image from few pictures we have left. He looked a lot like my father. I had never seen him with my eyes, but I set out to try to something like that. That is, to meet him, to try to meet him. First, I tried to picture my father's face and bring it to the fore in my thoughts. However, I had neither a memory nor a life within. It was not possible for me to be born and get to know him in his lifetime. So looking for a connection, I started some concentration of thought. While I was thinking, Hacı Hasan Alp, who is Muhsin's father, I repeated like that. I wanted to see myself in that picture with his dark eyes, his high cheekbones, the man with the sombrero with the shelf-like edges. My grandfather Hasan on my father's face, in that misty look of my father. I forced it. This rule worked. Sorry about the interruption. I realized that this rule worked. This rule worked. Let me call it a rule now, or should I say that this is the only consolation of a realm, this realm of the dead. It worked. I saw my grandfather Hasan in my father's face. It was like another scene that seemed to come to life inside that picture when you started squinting at a 3D picture, three-dimensional picture. When my father's face appeared clearly in my father's features, I saw that he was smiling at me. I smiled too. Grandpa, I recognize you. My name is Hasan. I said, I know Hasan is my son. Hasan is my grandson, my black lamp. You look like your father Muhsin. I reached the point where it appeared. As I was about to embrace, the image disappeared. There was no image of my father or grandfather around me. I was disappointed. I'm suddenly starting to think I'm all alone. That's what that was like. You are alone. You have nobody, no eyes, no ears, no hands, no arms, no feet. But you have consciousness. You have self. The sense that makes you continue to think, to exist. You can think. Actually, it's not being able to think exactly. You can only focus with yourself. You feel, that's all. From where my essence is, from where you thought I was myself, I could actually perceive everything. I could feel and perceive my surroundings, the environments of myself, at a panoramic angle of 360 degrees around me. I knew that concepts such a distance and proximity were meaningless. There was nothing to be seen or heard. And this is the section 3, guess. I felt someone calling my name. There was no one around, but what I could perceive with a feeling like ringing in my ears, like echoing, was my name being called. At the point I tried to feel what I could not see around me by forcing myself and my consciousness. Two faces appeared in the distance. There were others with them. But it was as if the other two people were a little further back, a little more obscure. I recognized these two faces, which became even more obvious. These were my uncle Ahmed and Ibrahim. I understood that two people who seemed smaller and fainter than them were my grandmother and grandfather Mehmet Turhan, whom I had never seen alive, while alive, and my mother's only father. I was not with my uncle Ibrahim when he passed away, but I remember the last days of my uncle Ahmed. In fact, when he surrendered his soul, I was with him in that room. Uncle Ahmed died in his father's house, in one of the rooms facing the street, while he was among us with his brothers, nephews, and brother-in-law around him. With the moment of death approached, he looked at everyone's faces for a long time, and his eyes were frozen on Aunt Nadia. One of my great aunts, Aunt Nadia, Aunt Haji Emine's wife, Uncle Mustafa, closed my uncle's frozen eyes with lowering his eyelids with his hands. I remember that scene like it was yesterday, very live in my mind. My late uncle Ahmed had gone to Germany to work after an unhappy youth period. He explained that he went to courses there to settle the language problem. Almost every summer when he returned to Turkey to his mother's house, there was always a young German lady with him. Their names would always be different. It didn't matter to us. Sometimes Monica, sometimes Helga. What did it matter actually? My uncle Ahmed had prostate cancer, and when it was understood that there was nothing to be done in the advanced stage of the disease, he could endure this situation with morphines that would relieve and reduce his pain and suffering even a little bit. He passed away in 1980 when he was 40 years old. I was very happy when I saw them in front of me. My uncle Zeki, me and my brother Ibrahim wanted to enter your dream together. However, since we saw you in front of us, we understood that you came to this realm, like us, to the realm of the dead. We said we could welcome him. My sister Eve, Aka Hawa, came before us, and she said, then I realized once again that living things are in a different communication with the people they see in their dreams, if they are alive. if they are not alive, that is, if the people he sees in his dreams are dead. Know that the person who entered his dreams, that person desired it, thought about it, focused his thoughts on his existence, name, and body. I started to think about who should I dream of, whose dream should I enter. Meanwhile, I thought of myself, just as there were no limitations in time and space in this realm. Could I go back to the days when I migrated to this realm and see myself, Hasan Zeki, and me in my life, in my dreams? For this purpose, I brought my image to the forefront of my consciousness and tried to concentrate on my diagram of my face. Actually, this was not an easy thing. I had to concentrate a lot, but suddenly I saw myself sleeping in the bed. My eyes were twitching. He was living the moment called REM, rapid eye motions, in medicine, me in bed. I didn't want to disturb or frighten him. I was not normal. It was not normal at all, to see oneself in front of oneself in a bloody dream. Until this time, I had never heard of him seeing himself in his dream. I didn't know I wanted to tell him the following, but I did not have the body parts to speak, to make my voice heard, to turn what passes through my consciousness into sounds and syllables. Don't be afraid, Hasan Zeki. It's me. So what you see in front of you is actually you. I, Hasan Zeki. I'm in another realm right now. I was wondering about my previous state. I'm in front of you now, and this coincides in time, space to you. It means that you are still alive. What's up with your work? Continue this. I felt like I was waking up from REM sleep. The movements of his eyelids became even faster, and he opened his eyes. At this very moment, I walked away from that room while my whole being was lying, with a feeling of withdrawal like a vacuum cleaner sucking the dust. I returned to the realm of the dead, where I had migrated again in the timelessness and spacelessness. It was a very different experience. Next time, I will imagine the dead state of myself and focus on this concept, which I think might be even more interesting. Who knows what I will encounter? In this way, I was able to enter the dreams of someone of the close relatives and relatives that I longed for, and to get their images in front of me by thinking about the images of others. This situation I was in was more vivid and more realistic than the electromagnetism effect animation I tried in my real life. I will describe this experiment in detail later. I didn't know what it happened. When I focused and concentrated enough, the image would appear. It would seem real. The image of that person would become clear. I was wondering how. I decided to find out why. How this happened? Okay, in this chapter, we are diving into the depths of consciousness in the other realm. When I was alive, among my occupations, I was involved in some mental activities that I could not tell anyone. Before, I was trying to do these mental exercises, wondering what would happen in the end, and with a little worry and hesitation. Later, when this concentration began to realize the deepening more consciously, I began to understand that it was a mechanism, a procedure. Instead of starting all over again in each mental exercise, I started to increase my thinking efficiency by placing a mark on that stage from the last point I left off. My productivity began to increase in acquiring new mental skills. I don't know how to explain this to you. However, I will be able to show that some activities are more understandable when I explain these things I have applied to since my novice period. I had my first experience with this in high school years, During a monotonous physical activity, which could be any repetitive movement, it could be a walk, for example. If I repeated this non-stop monotonous movement long enough, there would come a moment when it started to become slippery when I was in it. While he was doing this movement consciously, the movement and consciousness were advancing in a way, hand in hand, in a synchronous manner. In the monotony of the moment, the space-time wherein suddenly started to become slippery, and when I felt mentally was exactly like this. Where am I right now? What am I doing? Am I still doing this and that stuff? That moment had passed, so where am I now? Of course, all of a sudden, it gets blurry. You can't perceive anything, and all you can think about is, where am I right now? Am I doing something like that? It happens in this form. After the first experience, I started to return to my last conscious state with panic to delay the time-space duality that had slept under our feet and to return to real world and not to make much effort to end this mood. Actually, it was scary. This disappearance of consciousness and the concept of time and my wish to continue this situation at first seemed frightening and unsettling to me. Later on, I wanted to extend this experience, this mental experience, a little longer, when, of course, I knew that my physical presence and movement would not pose a risk to my life. In one of my experiments, I again performed a shift of consciousness with a non-stop, that monotonous movement. This time, however, I was brave and didn't hesitate to lose the consciousness-time synchronization duality. Going further, could I use this shift of consciousness to go, or rather flow, to other levels of consciousness? After establishing the shift state, I just started to focus my attention on my body, inside my body. Starting from my toes, focusing my gaze from the furthest parts of my body upwards to my ankles, from there to my legs, below the knee to my knee, and above my knee. I put my mind in the inner part of my body, in these organs, to observe, to feel if there is a change, a difference that my consciousness can feel it. It worked. I walked. I began to feel more closely the organs of my body, the veins, the blood flowing in the veins, the tension and the relaxation of my muscles, which continued to work under my eyes. It was as if my skin had become transparent. I kept staying at the top of my body with this mental strain. I continued with the concentration of my mind from the tummy up to my throat, and from there to my head. When I come to my neck, I wanted to feel the outgoing rays coming from my body, my whole body, the signals passing through my spinal cord and dissipating, but I couldn't feel any sensory difference other than a slight chill. Insistently, I took my thoughts on an imaginary journey up my neck, up the spinal cord, and forward. The border was my skull, but there was plenty of room to wander step by step, inch by inch, zone by zone, cell by cell. What I actually did was exactly this. I was focusing my thoughts on every fleshy part I could think of within the volume of my brain inside my skull. And I was trying to sense if there was a ringing, a vibration, a chill, the slightest change in consciousness that I could feel, that would make a difference in consciousness. While forcing myself to do this, I caught a glimpse of a place where my memories from the past were. Actually, the streets. In fact, these streets were the streets of the city where I spent my childhood and youth. Even when I was in normal consciousness, I used to dream of walking around the streets of my hometown that I miss. But this time it was different. It was much more lively and fluid. Moreover, the interesting thing was that while I was walking through the streets as if going through a flood, I saw that one point of each street connects with memories, another place, other people. It was like mapping through a landmark. In normal times, it was not possible for me to feel this mapping. Although I tried so hard, I cannot say what I perceived this mapping right here in my brain, but it was an image I felt intensely in my mind, wandered through the fleshy cavity of my skull. In a fully conscious state, a moment thought and the next thought can be completely different from each other. And it is really difficult for a person to decide for himself what to think in a moment and to direct this. It's like trying not to think about the monkey. This time I left the streets of the city where I was born and grew up for a moment and started to search for the events that I experienced and the people I knew in the farthest corners of my mind. My neighborhood friends, games, family members, relatives, neighbors, cousins, teachers, schoolmates. I could sense that each of them felt different vibrations as they passed like a film strip, but I couldn't feel any vibration, oscillating, ringing, any unusual physical difference that triggered communication mechanisms. This time I started to scan the memories from beginning to the end in my mind like a film machine that replays everything that happened from my childhood until the last moments of my life. From beginning to end, from end to end, from the very beginning to the end. Spanning it up now, I started scanning, watching it from the beginning of my life, as if I was on a gondola swing. At this moment, I began to feel something strange. The moments I remember started to become evident gradually from my childhood to my infancy. At other times, I felt like I was living my childhood and infancy days, which I never ever remember. When I was a baby, I felt like I was sucking milk from my mother's breast. I remember the times when I was loved and caressed as a baby. I was loved and caressed as a baby. My father touching my nose with a smile on my face and giving him smiles. With the thing is, from birth to feeling himself, to feel conscious, let's say 3 or 4 years must pass. In other words, 3 or 4 years, yes, 3 or 4 ages. This means that 100 million seconds, whichever way you look at it. Let's say the duration of the time we call a moment is like a second. In this case, we unconsciously live a moment like 100 million moments. Of course, sleep takes the longest time. I think the reasons why people have difficulty remembering the time spent in infancy could be investigated more closely. The moments that I seem to remember extra during this shift of consciousness at my mental journey are very few. It's like nothing compared to 100 million. When I finished this mental shift attempt, I suddenly felt myself completely clear of my mind, relaxed, energized, as if I had just woken up from sleep. I have repeated these attempts at consciousness shift in my health. Each time I felt details and depths that I could not remember before and did not attract my attention. However, I could not detect a vibration, a concentration of feeling, a weight that could activate my mental senses in my scanning of feeling about people. Yes, Universal Contact Center. Let me tell you about my thoughts in the netherworld, about focusing on my thoughts. When I reached the depth of my mind, I could not encounter any other place other than memory regions. However, these memory regions were not clustered in one place. It was as if it had spread all over the brain, like a hologram image. When you came to a memory point, You found yourself at a different point in every direction you turned. This time, however dark and empty it may seem, I decided to explore deeper points in my mind. However, I was looking for now was color, timbre, vibrating, analog changes, number, multiplicity, spatial difference, in short, anything, everything, anything. Like a person walking in the dark, very sensitive to the slightest stimulus, I noticed a bright white dot hanging in the air as I was wandering around in my brain. I felt myself flowing towards this dot. This illuminated white area began to change color as I approached it, and although it actually looked white from afar, as I got closer, I realized that it was a cluster of very different colors. I felt the presence of colors in the form of some colored stripes and halos in this set. Some of the colors were spirally wound. Others looked like ribbons of a ribbon unrolled. Human faces were visible on those wrapped in this way. It looked like something had been written on the ribbons that looked like ribbons unrolled from its spool. When I forced myself to focus on this, I realized that there was not something written along the length of the strips, but continuous numbers. It was like a long password. I tried to compare a few of them with each other. None of them were the same. While I was wondering what this could be, it occurred to me that whether this string of numbers would be a universal means of communication. It could be some kind of link, a means of communication, a frequency of linking, all right. I came across one of these real strips. I got on it and sat down. Although the strip seemed narrow, as I got closer to it, it began to thicken and take a form of a pipe, a hose. I found myself inside the wall material of this colored strip that seemed to be narrow. As I continued to progress, the pipe became a flexible tunnel through which I could pass. I chose a bright yellow stripe. The tunnel in which I was now, which surrounded my being, was bright yellow on all sides. At first, I didn't feel that I was moving, and rather that I was flowing somewhere. But now this accelerated movement could be felt very easily. It was as if I was flowing in a three-dimensional electromagnetic field moving towards somewhere. The accelerated movement has now very clearly increased my flow rate to some places and also increased it. It was as if I was traveling through my mind, swimming in a mind stream. I have no idea how long this stream lasts. Why did I realize that I never went anywhere? However, when I felt the change of situation, I suddenly found my son. It was like he was asleep. His eyes were closed, but he must have felt me next to him. He said, "Daddy, I missed you so much. I wish you could see those days. Look at my son. Look at my daughters. How much my son looks like you, isn't he?" And I realized that he was alive, that he was dreaming of me. I wanted to give him a message, but I could not talk. I could not walk. I could not move. The only message I could give him was to make him feel at peace in my soul. I felt that I was at peace, that I was in happiness. I wanted him to feel that way too. Then my son said, "You are smiling, Dad. I saw you in peace. My God, if only this dream would never end," I felt him say. This feeling was very different, how much more vivid than the moods I encountered during my lifetime experience of electromagnetic effect, amplification, and superimposition experiments. In a moment, I felt that the tunnel I had come through was pulling me back into itself. At that moment, I realized that my son, whom I felt as if I was talking to me, opened his eyes and woke up from the dream he was having. I started to move forward again by flowing and sliding through the bright yellow tunnel that drew me in. From this experience, I understood that That line of colorful stripes with a series of numbers on them was a region in my mind where I communicated with the universe. Now I understood this better. In those first moments of my death experience, when I tried to focus my mind on human images, what I actually did was to enter this region of my mind without being aware of it and focus my attention on the human images on a web strips and contact my dead relatives through the communication channel I established in this way. The open-ended stripes in the variegated, colorful area of my mind showed living people. In the realm of the dead, where there is no concept of time, the real thing is the moment. It made no difference whether the living person was asleep or awake. If he or she was asleep, you were entering his or her dream. If he was alive, if he was awake, you were on that person's mind. Okay, this time I have lived another experience. I want to share this experience with you. When I was alive, I was after a research and experiment. The question I was looking for an answer to in this research was the following: if suitable conditions are created, how would a magnetic field apply to a human body which is concentrated on the body and passing through various filters and rotating around its own axis with a certain radial movement would affect a psychological behavior and cerebral functions of the human body? In other words, would it affect activities such as movement functions, thinking, sleeping, daydreaming, or creativity? If so, could we, if this is correct, could we make this effect more lively by applying other factors that would strengthen and act as catalyst from the outside the body? For this purpose, I chose a corner in the basement of our house for research. A number of preparations I had to make. Strong magnets could be used as a source of magnetic field. However, I could also benefit from electromagnetism, that is, magnetization of electrical origins. For this, windings to surround the cylindrical tube and iron plates for magnetization were also needed. There was a need for perforated cylindrical grids that could rotate around the assembly at different angles and a mechanism for activating them. For each of these would allow turning the desired direction at desired speeds. With these perforated cylindrical grids that would be in several layers, the amount of magnetic energy that would come from the inside of the cylinder or the human body could be reduced and increased. This thought came to my mind when I learned that tube amplifiers are used as electronic signal amplifiers during my engineering education. If various types of vacuum tubes, popularly known as lamp amplifiers, could be used to amplify electrical signals, why not use as nonlinear operating characteristics that allow control amplification of a magnetic field and higher order magnetic modulations? For example, in tube technology, electronic components with 2, 3, 4, and 5 elements called diode, triode, tetrode, pentode could be used for different purposes. The main purpose was to control the electrical signal, but the complexity of the situation daunted me. In fact, sometimes I would leave everything as it is, and I could not make any progress in this project. How would I perform the supervision of electrical signal? I fell asleep somewhere in my mind, full of these intense thoughts. When I found myself in bed, I couldn't quite tell whether it was a dream or a waking state. However, I experienced something strange. I saw myself, that is Hasan Zeki, in my dream. He was standing right in front of me. But even if it was a dream, there was something strange. My dream seemed to have no substance. Myself in my dream seemed to have no substance, no body. It was like a copy of me cut out of a cardboard. He was wearing a plain white dress. Where his head was, there was a cloudy plasma-like substance. But his eye image resembled me. The other body parts, the extremities in medical terms, had an appearance as if they were transparent. I felt like I could pass through myself, standing in front of me if I reached out. He had such a thin structure and appearance. He addressed me as follows: "Don't be Hasan Zeki. Don't be afraid, Hasan Zeki. It's me. So what you see in front of you is actually you. That's to say, I'm Hasan Zeki, yourself. I'm in another realm right now. I was wondering about my previous state. I'm before you now. In this coincident time-space duality, it means that you are still alive. What's up with your work? Continue these." Was it a sign that he himself addressed me in this way and asked me to continue this as if he knew about my project? Did I have this dream as a token of determination I gave myself to continue my studies? I didn't quite understand, but after the fidgety moment, I opened my eyes and found myself in bed. I decided to continue my studies. What I needed to solve this was the magnetic tube issue. I have to solve the problem magnetic tube. The magnetic tube had become the center of my research. The grids to be used here would act as a control element. The main magnetic field force would come from the windings and magnets. I could superimpose a wide variety of events on the magnetic field to apply it and to look at their effects. I knew that our holy book was full of secrets and wisdom. I simultaneously computerized the character scanner and recitation formats. As a result, all verses from the very first to the last surah of the Holy Quran were simultaneously in digital environment, both written and auditory. I could access any surah and verse I wanted by coding it according to its number. With this access, I was able to obtain the digital data stream as electrical signals. I was going to superimpose these electrical signals on the magnetic field and use them in my experience. Of course, this research and experiment would remain hidden from now so as not to attract people's reaction. In fact, actually, my relatives were aware that I was doing some research and a series of experiments in the basement of our house. But they didn't know the details of the subject, and I didn't want to explain such a thing to them yet. Not yet. My preparations seemed complete. I was testing each item I completed over and over again. I didn't want any problems before starting the application. I was going to use myself in the experiment. For this, I also had to design a hand controller that could would start and stop functions, controlling the rotation, direction, and speed of the rollers that will start and stop the applied magnetic field, increase or decrease the strength of the magnetic field, selection of the signal to which the magnetic field will affect, etc., like this. The choice of signal to be affected by the magnetic field was a bit of a complicated matter. The nature of the verses of the Quran, when the character scanner and the scanning and recitation, audio information was transferred to the digital medium, was electrical. I could be possibly for them to be somehow converted into magnetic energy, and only in the way to superimpose this magnetic energy on electromagnets. The setup I prepared was not very sensitive, but it gave good results in short-term electrical signals. I could use this. The test day had come. In order to test my mental state once again, I tested the Surah Al-Kahf, many times, especially from the 9th verse, and to that extent I could imagine and visualize what it described as a state of mind while listening to its recitation in various positions in area. But I could visualize the 7 sleepers and the Katmir and the cave, and no other details could come to my mind. There was no other details in the verse anyway. It was said that even their number was accurately known only by Allah. In summary, that was all I could imagine in my dream. That day I checked the device one by one. Then I made ablution and entered my test leader. I activated the most central control. Initially, I tested it at low speeds and got it up to a speed I could withstand the centrifugal force. Meanwhile, I have activated the magnetic field feeder and activated one of the hollow cylinders controlling the signal amplification. I wanted to tell you the effect of this. As the magnetic field got stronger, that is, as I increased it with the control in my hand, the things I imagined in my brain began to oscillate and vibrate at that frequency, at the angular rotation speed of the cylinder. It was similar to the fluctuations in the northern lights due to magnetic storms in the sun, which are called aurora borealis, in the regions close to the poles of the propagation of light rays emitting by straight beams. At this very moment, it was time to initiate the interaction overlay called magnetic modulation. I entered the coding 18.9 to 18.22 from the verses of the Quran in the digital environment. Letters that have become electrical signals, superior, ephemeral, earthly, jazm, shadda, information, recitation, vocal effects passed through the transducer and became a magnetic effect and began to penetrate into me, my body, and my mind in the pentotube, whose anode was formed my own body in the form of magnetic energy in the electromagnetic mechanism. I was so excited. I was very curious about the effect, and I was feeling a little uneasy. I didn't know what a degree of augmented magnetic animation realism that could occur, what the limits were. However, I was so curious, I couldn't resist trying it. The magnetic information of Surah and Kaf, which comes to the perforated grids, created animation in my mind. I was inside that cave, as I looked around, as if I was watching a 3D movie. The people inside the cave started to enter my field of vision one by one. First, I saw that Pali, called Kutmir, that puppy. Oh my God, he was lying on the ground just as described in the verses, with his front paws extended parallel to each other, and he sat on his paws. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi wa subhanallah al-azim spilled from my lips. As I wandered around, I saw the sleepers one by one. Some were alone in the corner of the cave. Some were 2 or 3 together. However, I noticed that every time I turned my head and looked, their numbers seemed to be different. From this, I understood that only Allah knows how many people there are in the reality as described in the verse. Another detail I saw was that the sleepers were turned from side to side of their own accord. From time to time, I also noticed that a beam of sun rays came over them, even though they were in the cave. They were in the cave. Was it me wandering in that cave? How did I get to that cave? Was this a dream? It's so vivid and distinct that I don't know how it can be called a dream. I pressed the magnetic damper and the cylinder radial rotation retarded buttons on the remote on my hand. I was dying to immortalize this experiment I had. When I got out on my test tube, I checked the records one more time. As I replayed the 3D holographic recording, I felt as if I was reliving what I experienced. Return to the realm of the dead. It had been quite some time since he had been in the test tube. During my research, I started to focus on the Taha and Yasin surahs because they attracted my attention. This time, I could I would listen to the recitation of these two surahs, one after the other, and try to experience the magnetic empowerment and concentration of consciousness in the test tube in this way. When I reached the required speed, in the first verse of the chapter, Taha, I felt the address of the Almighty to man, to me, that is, to myself. In the first, second, and third verses, I felt the address. Oh human, we didn't send this Quran down to you to make you miserable. We only send it down as an advice and warning. I felt this in my whole being. During the recitation of the sixth verse, whatever is in the heavens and on the earth and between them belongs to Him, belongs to Allah. My awe increased, so much so that I came out under the ground where I felt that while listening to this. I glided from the earth toward the skies, into the void, into space. I have seen all the existence and non-existence of Him. I witnessed. When the next verses began to chant it on my media player, Hazreti Musa appeared on the stage, speaking to Musa, the Almighty Creator. In the following verses, I witnessed that the staff in Moses' hands turned into a snake. My Lord, I believed without your miracle. I witnessed your miracle. I still believe poured out. Later, the verses describe the moments when Musa and the Pharaoh had a dialogue. In the verses 65 to 70, where there is a challenge, I witnessed the miracle that took place. In the following verses of the Taha Surah, in 105, 106, 107, when the day of judgment came, I saw how the mountains and hills turned into dust and became flat. More precisely, I experienced the truth of this verse within the three-dimensional hologram in the room where the test tube was located. While the recitation was continuing in verse 115, I saw Adam. The Almighty Creator was telling His angels, prostrate before Adam. Not a single Iblis prostrate before Adam. Subhanallah. In verse 124, dhikr and remembrance of Allah were mentioned. Eskurullah zikran kesira came to my lips. Remember Allah abundantly. I wish that I could not be one of those who wake up blind on the day of judgment. As the surah ended in verse 135, I said Ameen, hoping that my fate will be with the righteous. When the recitation of surah ended on the media player, I started to remote, slowed down and stopped. It was a very different experience. I understood that earth, the sky, what is in between, the underground, and those who occupy them are not unclaimed. And I witnessed a cross-section of experiences of Prophet Moses. After these experiences, I eagerly wanted to the second part of the project. The holographic environment of the Surah Yasin will create the mood it will create. The state of awe it will create for me. The recitation of Surah Yasin started immediately after I prepared it one after the other in the media player. Listening to the recitation of the Surah Yasin in awe, oscillating with the verses in my test tube, I felt myself addressing the Creator's address. This oscillation kept me in awe until the reading of verse 51. When it came to verse 51, I heard the sound of a tire, the sound of blood in the wall, which was made my eardrums vibrate. When came to life before my eyes was this: the earth was splitting. Thousands of dead bodies were coming out of it. An explosion was heard behind it. The scale was set. In the verse 58, when it comes to the first, Salamun Qawlan min Rabbir Rahim, I felt that I had reached the highest levels of the awe I have lived in. Something was happening to me. Oh my God, what a state this was. I experienced my childhood, school years, university years, my first job experience, my military service days, my marriage, the birth of my son, The growth phased up to the age of 24 like a film strip flashing before my eyes. Since we couldn't have another child other than our son, I started to forget the childhood of the only child. I prayed many times that the Creator would make our son live his childhood once again while he was dying. Now my prayer had been accepted. I felt like I had lived through those good days, my son's infancy and childhood years once again. Oh Lord, my Lord, or was I attaining your mercy? I neither heard nor felt the following verses, only the 83rd and the last verse. The phrase, the ilahi turja'un, meaning you will all be returned to him, which stuck in my mind, resounded on my consciousness, and I felt nothing again. Okay, this is the end of my essay. Okay, I have written this essay, this fantastic story many years ago. It was written in Turkish, and after a while, after some years, I decided to broadcast this in English. And don't worry, friends, I will make another broadcast that would be in Turkish, and you will understand each letters, each pages, each lines, each rows of this fantastic story. Let me paraphrase this in my native language. Arkadaşlar, bu hikayeyi yıllar önce yazdım ve de bunu İngilizce olaraktan arkadaşlarla, insanlarla paylaşmak istedim. Birkaç gün içerisinde bunun Türkçe versiyonunu, yani orijinalini de sizlerle paylaşacağım. Eğlence için değil de, fakat bunu bir kategoriye koyamadım ben. Nasıl bir kategoriye koyacağım diyerekten entertainment kategori içerisinde yerleştirdim arkadaşlar. Hepinize iyi akşamlar diyorum. Beni izlediğiniz için teşekkür ederim. Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks again. Bye bye.